He's been called the last son of Krypton, the Man of Steel, the Metropolis Marvel, and the Man of Tomorrow. But by 1991, the DC Comics flagship character Superman was becoming known as something else, increasingly irrelevant. Created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster in 1938, Superman had spent the years since cementing his place in pop culture as arguably the most iconic superhero of them all. But as his big-screen movie franchise fizzled out with 1987's Superman 4: The Quest for Peace, and the comic book industry took a turn toward more edgy, violent characters during the late 80s and early 90s, the character often labeled the Big Blue Boy Scout suddenly felt old-fashioned, as evidenced by the declining sales of his books. In 1991, the debut of Lois and Clark, a network television show DC hoped would revive the character's popularity, was still 2 years away. And when some DC writers asked if they could finally have Superman marry his longtime love interest, Lois Lane, in the comics to bump up sales, they were told they would have to wait until that show did the same in its later seasons. Frustrated about what else they could possibly do, writer and artist Jerry Ordway would frequently joke to his fellow Superman writers and the DC editorial team, "Why don't we just kill him?" But even he was surprised when, during one of the writers' summits in 1991, the rest of the team no longer treated it like a joke. Sure enough, the very next year, DC Comics announced and began publishing the multi-part story known as The Death of Superman, in which a rampaging monster known as Doomsday single-handedly defeats the entire Justice League before he and Superman engage in a brutal one-on-one brawl that sprawls across several U.S. states. The fight climaxes, not surprisingly, in Superman's beloved Metropolis, where both Superman and Doomsday deliver final blows at the same moment, each seemingly dying from the impact. For DC, the ploy worked. Not only were sales for the event gigantic, but the story was a genuine cultural event, covered on national news and drawing attention even from those who hadn't read or thought about a comic in years, if ever. Today's comic audience is savvy enough to know a major character death in a Marvel or DC book is rarely permanent, but this was not the case in 1993 when Superman number 75, the issue featuring the character's death, was published. Still, there were clues that this wasn't the real end of Superman. For instance, there was the fact that each of his multiple comic titles were still being published, despite his death. So, what do you do with Superman comics when there is no longer a Superman? DC answered this question with another multi-part storyline, Reign of the Supermen, which saw 4 new characters arrive in Metropolis, each laying claim to Superman's mantle and legacy. Superboy was a brash, leather jacket-wearing teenage clone of Superman. Eradicator was a yellow visor-wearing alien obsessed with doling out sometimes lethal justice to criminals. The villainous cyborg Superman was a twisted parody of Marvel's Mr. Fantastic, a former astronaut turned half-robot after an accident with a solar flare killed the rest of his crew. And finally, there was John Henry Irons, an African-American former weapons designer turned construction worker whose life had been saved by Superman years ago, and so he decides to build a suit of armor and take up Superman's heroic patrol of Metropolis as Steel. Not surprisingly, the actual Superman would eventually return, as it was revealed he had actually been in more of a deep coma than actually dead. It was a move that essentially cemented the idea that death in mainstream comics was impermanent, but nonetheless also confirmed that, occasional low sales or not, Superman is simply too iconic of a character to ever disappear for good. Meanwhile, in the years that followed, the death and return of Superman storyline became the white whale of those looking to create cinematic Superman material. It was the basis for a number of developed but unfilmed screenplays, was adapted twice as animated movies, elements were used in both the long-running CW show Smallville and Zack Snyder's big-budget DC films, and recently it's even been incorporated into the current CW show, Superman and Lois. But, interestingly enough, the first element of the death and return of Superman to make it to screens didn't concern the Man of Steel at all. Or at least, not that Man of Steel. The year is 1997, and Warner Brothers are ready to team with a world-recognized superstar athlete to launch the next big cinematic superhero franchise with Steel.
'Hello, listeners. You've heard of the DCEU. Well, get ready for Failure to Franchise presents the DCPU.
you. Oh my God. Open up a window. Jesus. Light a match.
Welcome once again to Failure to Franchise, the show dedicated to some of Hollywood's most infamous mistakes, missteps, and misfires. This is Trev. Chris?
Oh yeah, sorry. Sorry. I've been busy making a suit of armor, made of iron, like that movie. What's the one? Robert Downey Jr. Jon Favreau played his driver. That movie, that one.
Yeah, Doolittle.
Oh right, yes. I was compelled to make a Doolittle suit of armor.
Yeah, that makes sense. Definitely on theme. So we are back with another edition of not the DCEU, but the DCPU, and continuing our decade-by-decade look at the failed franchise starters of DC Comics and Warner Brothers. This has been going on for a while, folks. DC's troubles did not just start recently. Last episode, we looked at our 80s entry, Supergirl, and now we're traveling to the 90s. Chris, one of our favorite decades, I believe, for failed franchise starters.
Big time.
With a movie that I will say, I don't know, if you, like, without even talking about what we think of the movie yet, would you at least agree with me that this is a movie that just screams the 90s in many ways?
Oh, it's 90s and beyond for sure.
Yes.
Big time.
Okay.
Big time.
Yeah. Yes. So today we are looking at 1997's Steel. Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit about this one?
Of course, it is written and directed by Kenneth Johnson. He directed Short Circuit 2, a bunch of Alien Nation TV movies, but he is most famous for creating and writing The $6 Million Man, The Bionic Woman, and V, those classic TV shows. And then also, speaking of superheroes, he was a significant cog in the Incredible Hulk TV show from the 80s. So we got a superhero master on our hands.
Yeah, although he wouldn't say that apparently.
No.
But yeah, and he'd already been around for a while too. By the time this came along, obviously with that.
Big time.
Yeah.
Steel is obviously based on the comic series or character created by Louise Simonson and John Bogdanove. I think I got this right. That's how you say his last name.
That's how I've said it. Yeah.
I like to put a little accent on his name, so I'm cultured. I'm a cultured man, Trev. The budget of Steel is $16 million, and oh boy, it made $1.7 million worldwide. This came out 2 weeks after Spawn debuted, a Failure to Franchise alum. Go listen to that episode. And then was the cause of a 7-year hiatus for DC superhero movies, which was then brought back to life. Well, some may say brought back to death with Catwoman in 2004. Another Failure to Franchise alum. So, yeah, lots to talk about this one.
Man, can you imagine the glory days of this, like in 1997, when you could walk to your local multiplex and choose between Spawn or Steel?
You would just find me. We would all have that like ring face, you know.
So I talked a little bit about this in the intro, but for those who don't know, Steel, much like our last episode, Supergirl, is another essentially spin-off of Superman, at least in the comics, coming out of the Death of Superman storyline, and more specifically, the Reign of Superman storyline that followed. Steel was one of the 4 Superman replacement characters. So it didn't take too long for them to actually bring this one to the screen to kind of get it going. Chris, do you want to talk a little bit about why that is and who, had the mindset to bring Steel from the comic pages to the big screen so quickly after his comic debut?
Well, it mostly comes from Quincy Jones.
Yes.
Which is interesting enough. Quincy
mega
Jones,
producer.
Quincy Jones, music producer Quincy Jones.
And TV and film, but I think people think of him primarily as like music, obviously, but he's dabbled in everything. He's really one of those like super producers.
You're so right. He was like quintessential in getting like Fresh Prince of Bel-Air off the ground, like all that stuff. So yeah, you're right. But he saw something really personal with the Steel character. Of course, when we flash back to the early 90s to mid 90s, there's not a lot of black or African American role models for children in the cinema. Right? It's on the page, but not so much in the theater. So he looks at Steele as more of kind of like a role model figure. So like I saw a quote here talking about how he didn't like the words like superpowers or superhuman being or anything, but more of a role model. So kind of this might get into what we think about the movie and what we talk about, but almost like, would you say an after school feature type thing, like something with message and something with heart?
For sure, because to feed more off of that quote, Quincy Jones was also quoted saying that the reason he really fell for the character, like on the comic page, and because you just mentioned too the idea of there not being enough black heroes in cinema, but that was true in comics at the time too, and that was one of the more revolutionary aspects of Steele, especially to add him to the Superman mythology, which is obviously Superman is a white character, most of his supporting cast was white, so the fact that one of these new versions of Superman, and really the one who sticks around and becomes very significant after the death and return of Superman, was a black character. And Quincy Jones said that, and this is him speaking at the time, he said that he found children's perspective of the future has changed for the worse. And I hate seeing young people who don't believe in the future. Steele, and I don't want to use that word superhero because it doesn't fly or anything like that, represents a role model. Let's just call him a superhuman being.
And it kind of goes then why they would look at Shaquille O'Neal for the role. Because here we are in, I guess, the early 90s, and, this guy bursts out on the basketball scene in 92, Rookie of the Year, immediate cultural icon, would you say? Just from his stature, his inherent charm to him, his abilities, like, what would you say?
I mean, I would have to agree with that. As I was a little kid at the time, and I was never the biggest basketball fan. I never followed basketball, but he was one of those people who, even if you didn't follow basketball, you knew Shaq.
Yeah.
And that just happened, as you said, almost immediately as soon as his NBA career started. He was just, like you said, his size, his stature, his larger than life persona. He was a megastar almost instantaneously, and a megastar that everybody kind of gravitated towards, whether you were a basketball follower or not. And like you said, like very much like a role model as well, like a likable celebrity, right? Like someone people really kind of gravitated towards in that degree.
Well, it's something that I've seen with the research, because again, John Henry Irons, the character of Steele, I am not super familiar with. So in doing the research and stuff, he just seems like a very just a good replacement for Superman. Like very genuine, very heroic, very polite, very, does the right thing, the way that Superman is too, right? And
that was kind of the whole point of that storyline, right? There's these 4 Superman replacements. Steele is the one that most obviously is not Superman. He's obviously a very different person, and like the other ones are like claiming to be Superman or saying they have a part of his soul or something, or they're clones. But then you have Steele, who's like, no, I'm just a guy who's inspired by him. And even Lois Lane in the comic says, but of all of them, he's the one who seems to have Superman's heart the most.
Oh, totally. Yeah. With Shaq, did you ever buy any of his rap albums in the 90s?
No, I didn't. I mean, I definitely remember them, and I remember like laughing about them. But like, I mean, whatever else we're gonna say about this movie and like Shaq for the rest of the episode, would you agree that? And I hesitate to say this because I feel like every time we do this, they're gonna suddenly something's gonna come out and he's gonna get canceled or something. But Shaq really does seem to me like one of those guys that just nobody doesn't like.
Yeah.
Like everybody loves Shaq. He just seems like this really fun-loving, nice, engaging person. Great personality, very funny, very self-aware of himself. Whether all that translates to acting ability, we'll talk about as we get into this. But by the time they come to him for Steel, it wasn't like this was his debut film. He had already been in Blue Chips, which I remember seeing in the theater. I think that's because my parents wanted to see it. I don't think anybody came out of Blue Chips necessarily blown away by Shaq's like acting ability. In fact, I remember him being kind of criticized for that aspect.
Right.
But still, I mean, then he follows it with Kazam, like a starring role in a Genie movie. It was really just clear that this happens sometimes. I feel like especially it used to happen more than it does now. But like these megastar athletes become cultural icons to the level where every industry wants them, right? So if he wants to put out a rap album, they're going to let him. If he wants to put out a video game called Shaq Fu, they're going to let him. And if he wants to be a movie star, the Hollywood is going to salivate at that prospect.
I think there's something special about athletes that, they transcend demographics. They transcend age and color or creed or whatnot. There's something inherently cool or just fun about, competition and being the best. Being the best at what you do, right? And somebody like Shaq, what is he, 7'1", I think? He is a big dude. and I think he, again, larger than, like you said, his larger than life personality matches his stature. And again, it makes sense why people grasp onto somebody like Shaq for all these different industries or all these different things or these tie-ins. Like, I agree. Shaq is awesome. I think in just as a person, I think he's just genuinely just an awesome, great, fun-loving, good dude. And he's kind of a corporate shill. There's and they make what's his nuts. Charles Barkley makes fun of him for this all the time. Right? It's like rarely something he won't put his name on. Like he sells Epson ink and printers. And me and my friends have actually talked about this a lot about Shaq being like, how much money is enough money for you to just always sell out your name for all this just junk?
Epson Ink comes with so much ink, you can print up to 5,000 pages. Can your printer do that? Out of ink already? This printer's costing me a fortune. You expensive little... Don't get cartridged. Switch to Epson EcoTank. Instead of cartridges, EcoTank comes with bottles of ink. Ooh. The bottle snap in place, then you just fill and chill. I'm chilling already.
It's funny because we can make fun of him. I think if it was anybody else, like if it was like a Jared Leto doing that, I think it would just be like the worst thing ever, and we would hate the
Rock.
guy. Or, you know what? Yes, or The Rock. You were so right. Perfect. But there's something about Shaq that is so naturally funny and charming that he's kind of a big goofball. So when he's sitting there, selling Cheetos or whatever, you're like, nah, it's Shaq. Like I like that guy. There's something cool about him.
It's like impossible. It's impossible to be mad at Shaq or to be annoyed by Shaq. I think you just look at me like, I love that guy. That's great, and like, yeah, that translates. And the other important thing we should say too is that in terms of him coming to this role, he is a huge Superman fan. In fact, he has a Superman S shield tattoo on his arm that says Man of Steel. So it was almost like he was born to play this role, although not the first choice, we should mention.
No, funnily enough, Wesley Snipes was the first choice for this role, and then a year later came out with Blade, which fundamentally, in my opinion, changed comic book movies. This would have been interesting to see Wesley Snipes in this role.
Yeah, I think he made the right call, and I think we all benefited for it. And obviously comic book movies benefited from it too. And you mentioned how this followed Spawn, which as we know is also a failure. Spawn coming out and then 2 weeks later Steel coming out and performing as they both did, that could not have been great news for, like black superheroes in movies. And the fact that just a few months later, thankfully, we got Blade, which, was like not a mega hit, but a substantial enough hit to actually get the ball rolling on more serious superhero movies. Thank God,
And a hit in the sense that legitimized, R-rated, adult-focused superhero fare,
Yeah.
And, me and you we talk very, very openly about how much we love Blade. The third movie is bad, but it's like something about it. It's fun to watch.
It's watchable. Blade and especially Blade 2, which is the masterpiece of the trilogy.
Oh, big time. Yeah. And also Warner Brothers chooses Shaq because, again, marketability, right? He's good with kids. It's they're going to sell more toys. They're going to sell merch. They're going to sell T-shirts, all that shit. And guess what? They didn't. It was, again, a colossal failure. But they have their star. They want somebody to make this movie. And as we said, the guy who did the Incredible Hulk TV show signs on, and he is so uninterested in making a superhero film. He's outspoken about it. He's turned down many roles in the past. People have come to him about a bunch of superheroes to make these big screen debuts of his hit television series, all this other stuff. And he's always said no. But what he liked about Steel, and also the producer, Joel Simon, is that Steel is kind of a knight in shining armor in a contemporary setting, and almost like a blue-collar Batman.
Yeah, although we should, like you mentioned, did not want to call this a superhero movie. He was kind of adamant about that, and he made right away he made some changes to Steel as he appears on the page. Got rid of the cape. He made some other changes to the costume because he saw him more as a knight, than a knight in shining armor in a contemporary setting than a superhero, and that's kind of like. I was stretching my mind to remember, like, what do I remember about this movie when it came out back then? Because it's not a movie. I'll just say right now, I didn't see this movie in the theater. I didn't see this movie until a couple days ago. But I was trying to remember, like, what did I remember about the release of this movie? And I feel like I remembered that being the talk about how there being, certainly fans upset about the kind of the filmmaker feeling like, making some statements that seemed like he wasn't really vibing with the comic book source material.
Well, so much that he invents all new protagonists, side characters, antagonists, and really doesn't go to the source material almost at all.
We'll talk more about that in the review, I'm sure.
For sure. You want to talk a little bit about the 90s here? Like do you want to talk about why this movie is almost a perfect 90s movie?
If you know what, why talk? I would just tell people you don't need to talk about the 90s. Just watch Steel, and you'll get the 90s. That is the 90s for you. Some movies, like I said, just bleed the 90s, and this is a movie that does from the soundtrack to the everyone wearing the baggy clothes. To what I know you and I have talked about before, that 90s movie lighting, where
I
was watching it and I brought that up with my girlfriend. I said like, oh, this is that 90s movie lighting, and my girlfriend was like, yes, every single square foot of that house is lit. House. And that's kind of where it's just like everything's awash and very bright lighting. Everything looks like a TV show. Even just like I'm sure you'll agree, like just the editing style of this movie. The humor, everything about it to me was like so evocative of like what these 90s comic book and blockbuster type movies were like at the time. You know
what I also noticed too, and not to, it's been a while since we've done a score horror or anything, but because we're on the topic of 90s movies, do all these movies have the same score? I'm pretty sure it's always the exact same, like, loud and bombastic notes, and it's almost like all these movies shared each other's temp music and placeholder cues, and then they were just like, do that.
It's pretty generous to even call this one a score, and not just a 5-second, like, musical theme that plays after every single beat in the movie.
Everything. Yeah. But it's like so reminiscent of like Judge Dredd or even Wild Wild West or hell, the Schumacher Batmans, So it's like there's definitely a theme going on here, definitely. And then in the 90s, again, the 90s are charming, right? Like we sound like we're making fun of the 90s films, but as our loyal listeners have heard in the past, like we get a kick out of them, like these are either obvious sets or the exact same streets on New York all the time, freshly lit with like wet cement and like incredible overhead lighting.
Yeah, totally. No, this I agree. It's like these 90s movies are just kind of like sometimes like somewhat comfort food for me because they do just like really bring back the memories of that time. And before we go into the review, though, I just also to just go back to Shaq for a moment. I do want to we should mention, give him some credit where credit is due. So what they get him signed on to this because they originally come to him to talk about a different comic book character that DC has called Hardware. And Shaq actually tells them he's more interested in Steel. And they're like, oh, we're making a Steel movie. And we just lost Wesley Snipes. So it kind of all works out, right? Mm-hmm. The only problem is that at the time they're getting ready to film this, Shaq is not only still committed to training at the Los Angeles Lakers camp in Hawaii, but he's also committed to playing in the Summer Olympics coming up. Right. And so they have very, very limited time with him. They only have 5 weeks to film with him. He only does one read through of the script before the Olympics. And then when he comes back, they say he worked with an acting coach in between his games, while he was in the Olympics to work on the character and everything. But when he comes back to act with the rest of the cast, he has all his lines. He has the entire script memorized. Right. Now, I know when I say that, somebody might say like, oh, yeah, that's what actors are supposed to do. But don't forget, he wasn't an actor, right? This is only his third movie. He obviously took it very seriously. And the other just interesting factoid I think is and it makes sense, is that he had to perform all of his own stunts because they literally could not find a stunt double that was as big as him. So they couldn't find anyone that really looked like Shaq in the suit or even from a distance. So he did all his own stunts too, which again, also very surprising considering how important he was to the NBA that would even be allowed.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to tell the listeners if he did a good job?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
How would you like to help me deal the next generation of superweapons to the world?
the weapons of tomorrow.
I've already made quite a few of these dandy little toys. Do you really want to be the only ones without my kind of firepower?
Terrorizing our cities today.
Officers down. We got a big problem here.
Now, to protect those who can't fight back.
Gang still messing with him?
Worse than ever.
One man must stand up for the people.
Maybe the police aren't enough. Maybe we need a new kind of firepower for ourselves.
Got you, bro.
What exactly am I supposed to be doing here?
We make our own kind of weapons to take out the ones in the streets. To stop an enemy without hurting them.
And become a new breed of hero.
It might get a little dangerous.
I laugh at danger.
I boogie around danger like a soul-trained dancer.
With a will of iron, a heart of gold, and a body of steel.
It's hammer time.
What a magnetic personality.
Well, you gotta admit, the guy's got style.
Shaquille O'Neal.
Where'd he go?
The Batcave?
Steel.
Man, I could be Robin.
You wanna know what you can do to help?
What? Anything.
Don't tell Grandma.
John Henry Irons designs weapons for the military. When his weapon project that harmlessly neutralizes enemies is sabotaged, causing his friend to be paralyzed from the waist down, John leaves the service in disgust. But when he sees gangs are now using his weapons on the streets of LA, he taps into his high-tech skills to fight back and rid the city of crime. With the help of Uncle Joe and Sparky, John becomes the new Man of Steel.
I get it. Chris, was this a first time watch?
The nonchalant, like that, just that. No, yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah. Was this a first time watch for you as well?
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna let you go first. I'm curious to hear what you thought of this one before I jump in.
Okay.
As someone who, because like you said, to just preface this, I know a little bit more about the character. I read that whole storyline. I've definitely read Steel and numerous other comics since, and you were kind of going in really cold on this. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts as an introduction to the character.
Okay, I'll get this out of the way, and then I'll get into specifics, okay? This movie is ass. But not even the biggest piece of ass that Ray J's been inside.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. So, know what I'm saying? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. This movie is quite poor, but let me say what you were talking about with Shaq in the beginning. Okay. Everything Mean will say about Shaq is about his acting, right? I think this guy is trying so hard. Okay, and I think he needs something. We have to commend him on something that he really tried. You know, like he was doing his best at this time, and he wanted to do a good job. And I think it's clear that that's about as good as you're gonna get out of him. You know, but it really does come down to him being the problem. He is horribly miscast. His size is actually a problem. Every actor, when they're talking to him in like a 2-shot or even a shot reverse shot, their neck is cranked so far up that it looks like it's uncomfortable. The camera's noticeably angled upwards. Every indoor scene felt like Gandalf visiting Bilbo at Hobbiton, you know?
Think about that decision, too, of being like, okay, we've cast Shaq, an actor larger than any other human being on Earth. Every actor's going to be looking up at him. Let's put the love interest in a wheelchair.
I know. It's just a horrible decision to do these things. I said before that I got a sense even in the movie that, John is a very heroic character. Like, he wants to do the right thing. And he does feel like a natural Superman replacement, but Shaq is just not the right guy. Like, he's not the right guy to get that innate boyish charm. heroism to the forefront. There's just something lacking, and it's just skill. Like it's a fundamental lack of acting. And it's just kind of dull. Like the movie's just kind of dull. It goes through the motions of all these other superheroes we've all seen, these junky ones. And one thing I want to say right now before we get into it, and I'll let you go in a second. So let me just say this.
Sure. Yeah.
It took. I made that Iron Man. Some would say joke in the beginning of this recording. Why did it only take until 2008 for these movies to go so hard in the paint with universes? Because this is a movie that makes that mistake of being like sort of meta but not really meta, and has references to Batman Forever, the Batcave, hey, you ain't Superman, hey, I could be Robin, but then they never really pull the trigger on the source material and straight up say to the audience, hey, yeah, Batman is around in this universe. Superman's around in this universe. It doesn't pull from the source material that it should when it's right there. They're making the references. Just fucking make it a real thing. Do the universe tie-in right now. Like, why not? The Warner Brothers owns everything with this. In our series, the DCPU, Warner Brothers owns everything. Why are they so gun-shy? Yet they'll have Batman Forever arcade games in the background. It's like, is it in universe? Is it not? They don't know what to do, and it's kind of this, have their cake and eat it too moment. That I'm not saying it's confusing, but I think it's just dumb. Like it just comes off lazy and just kind of misguided. So I'll let you do your thing, but I wanted to sneak that in up at the top there. So go ahead.
I'm surprised you didn't like it. I thought this is kind of like a misunderstood masterpiece.
Yeah, right. Get the fuck out.
No, it was actually like, it's almost relieving to do this movie in a sense and like talk about it, because I feel like recently we've done a lot of like bad movies that were still somewhat fascinating, or they're bad in a way that was very interesting to us, or so miscalculated that we're like, oh, well, this is like at least worth talking about, or they're bad for, mistakes that seemed beyond their means or whatever. But this was just a good old-fashioned shitty movie, and sometimes you need those to remind you, like, oh yeah, sometimes movies are just bad. They're just bad on a conceptual level, and everything was bad about it. And Steel is one of those. Now, here's where I'm going to slightly disagree with you, only slightly, because I agree with everything you said about Shaq in this. He's obviously not good. I think you were kind of trying to get at this. The one like kind of compliment I'll give him is his own innate natural charisma and likability.
Yes.
Makes you still like him even though it's a bad performance. And that's one thing. So like when we say he's bad, you mentioned before, and we everyone knows we don't like shit talking actors.
No, never.
But in this case, it's actually true, because sometimes when you like talk about how bad an actor is, there is a little bit of a delight in it, right? It's kind of like, oh, that actor sucks. And like with this one, it's like you're actually kind of like, oh, honey, it's like you're almost like you're like rooting for him to be better, and you like feel bad when he's like not great, because like you said, I think you can sense his enthusiasm, you can sense how much this character really means to him, and I don't think when The Rock wants to play Black Adam, and we'll get there,
yeah,
it's because he sees something in Black Adam that like stokes his ego. I think when Shaq wants to play Steel, it's because he actually believes that Steel is like this important role model who's doing good for the community, and kids are going to look up to Steel, So like you really want this to be better for him, but he's just not there. He's not ready for it.
It's such a well-intentioned film, like a well-intended film. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like nobody went out to make this a piece of shit, and it just happened to turn out a piece of shit.
Yes.
Right, yeah.
But where I'd slightly disagree with you is you said like the problems largely lay on him. I don't know if I completely agree with that, because I think even like a better actor in this, there would still be a larger problem. And that is, and I know we've mentioned this before with other movies, we talked about this the 90s in general, and we've already kind of alluded to it. The problems with Kenneth Johnson here is that this is another one of those comic book movies that's embarrassed to be a comic book movie.
Yeah.
And you were just talking about that. There's no reason for this not to be directly connected to the Superman universe. When you have an actor who literally has a Superman tattoo on his arm, and you zoom in on that tattoo in the movie, as you said, you leave the audience confused, first of all, because now I'm supposed to wonder, okay, in the universe of this movie, is John Henry Irons a fan of the fictional character Superman, or does he have that tattoo because Superman is real? The movie like never really gives you that answer,
Yeah.
But it hovers over your head. And if he's such a fan of Superman, why wouldn't he have the red cape? Why wouldn't he like be more Superman-esque in his presentation? And then beyond that, the movie also drops out a lot of the elements of the Steel character from the comic just in general. Like, right, Slate, the design doesn't have the S shield on the suit. The mask is different. And, like, to me, most importantly, I thought it was a super odd decision that, the character Steel in the comics is known for wielding a large iron hammer. Because, of course, that's, he's John Henry Irons. He's named after John Henry, the famous, folklore character. So, of course, he has a giant hammer, and he uses it as a hammer in the comics, as one would. And in this movie, I don't think there's unless Chris, you can remind me, but I don't think there's a single moment in the movie where he uses the hammer as a hammer. Instead, they make the odd decision that the hammer is actually a gun.
Yeah.
And I hated that so much. So it's a movie that's like embarrassed of its source material. It's, too childish. It's not like... It doesn't have like enough bite to it to really get across some of the themes it's going for. And then you have the Shaq problem, which that's like the most unfortunate problem. Because like I said, I really don't want to shit talk him because he's trying so hard and he's still likable. But the movie just can't quite overcome the fact that he's not an actor. And I think after this, he realized that. Like from this point on, you see him whenever he's in movies, it's just kind of like as cameos, as himself or like a goofy little character. I think maybe this was like the final reality check of going like, oh yeah, this isn't where my skills are most needed.
And you're so right about it being embarrassed to be a superhero movie because Steele's big entrance in full costume is that he slowly walks around a corner. And there's just nothing cinematic about the way Kenneth Johnson is shooting this film. And again, Shaq's an athlete, but he's not exactly graceful. Right? So he's a big dude, so big that he had to do all his own stunts. They couldn't find a human being to keep him from harm's way. And the action is just shot so slow and clunky and boring. And Shaq looks uncomfortable wearing this obviously rubber suit. And it's almost like he's in pain. Like, did you notice like he's like walking around and he just seems like he's really struggling even to walk? Yeah. And again, this guy's an athlete, but it's just he's also not a stunt performer, right? So he doesn't know how to move in these costumes, and the costume is cheap as fuck too. Like this movie, I said whatever it was made for, 16 million or something, and I mean a lot of explosions, and you know me, I love my explosions, but the money did not go towards the suit.
It was just Shaq's protein shakes, probably. Like.
And it's also not smart enough, like you said, to deal with even the themes that it's going for. Like Annabeth Gish plays Sparky, who's kind of literally John's woman in a chair situation. And speaking of Annabeth Gish, she was ringing a bell. I noticed her from a thing. She's kind of a Mike Flanagan regular in the last few years. Hey, did you notice
She's become that in recent years, but to me, I mean, I don't know if you went over the whole filmography. For me, and I think for a lot of like genre fans, Annabeth Gish's like big claim to fame is she was the Gillian Anderson replacement in the X-Files, essentially. And I shouldn't say replacement because Gillian Anderson never left the X-Files, like David Duchovny did. But in the later seasons, when David Duchovny left, Robert Patrick came on as the new agent Doggett. And then when Gillian Anderson wanted to reduce her screen time, they gave Doggett a new partner, Reyes, Monica Reyes, and Annabeth Gish played her. And they were setting the franchise up to be taken over by Robert Patrick and Annabeth Gish, but the fans never took to them in the same way. I don't think that's entirely their fault. I think this is a whole X-Files rant I could get into. I think if the writers had handled the show a little bit better at that point, you could have actually had multiple seasons, even with Doggett and Reyes. But I think they were a little disserviced by the writing and the direction of the show at that point. But yeah, so to me, I always think of her first as Agent Reyes from X-Files. But like you said, she's stuck around. She's had a long film and TV career, and now she's like popping up in all the Mike Flanagan shows, including the upcoming The Fall of the House of Usher.
Right. Yeah. But she plays in this movie John's friend that gets paralyzed. They are soldiers together, and she gets hurt, and there's something to be said about maybe the VA and how veterans are treated in America, and this movie does not care about that. So much so that, she's depressed. There's a scene where she's like depressed in the VA hospital. I know I'm laughing, and it's a very odd sentence to say when you laugh, but and she's kind of like just staring out the window, and then John comes to visit her to kind of get her. Well, I was going to say get her back on her feet. That's not what I mean, but to get her going again and uplifting, and also help me out in my mission. And he like smashes the window open. Mm-hmm. And there was a part of me that thought he was going to fucking throw her out the window. But instead, kidnaps her out of the VA.
Which is still funny because he picks her up in the chair. He like just grabs the entire chair, picks it up, and walks out there. And every other person in the hospital starts cheering.
Yeah, they start
even though they have no idea what's going on. Like to them, they just see a large man enter and kidnap this poor paralyzed woman in a chair, and they all just start cheering.
Yeah, and that was very funny to me. I thought this movie has, to say something good about it, it has some of those unintentional bad movie laughs, right?
Yes, for sure.
Like let's just say that the villain Nathaniel Burke is played by Judd Nelson from Breakfast Club fame. And his name is Burke, and in the post-Aliens world, you can't be called Burke and not be a villain. But there's a moment near the end where he's kind of like he wants to sell this weaponry to the highest bidder, right? And somebody goes to him, well, how much? And he goes, millions! And that made me laugh. And there's a wheelchair surprise, which is maybe the biggest laugh in the movie, which we'll get to, maybe. I don't know if I want to spoil. Oh, fuck it. Do I spoil it? Yeah, you know what? It's Steel. Sparky is in a wheelchair the whole time. And at the end, she surprises the villain with, like, murder laser turrets. And
that's then she also has, like, the rocket boosters.
Oh, so funny. So she, like, just speeds off. But yes, a lot of unintentionally hilarious 90s moments. That's why, again, it fits into that quintessential 90s vibe where they thought this looked cool, but it definitely did not.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you were talking about how it kind of drops the ball on, like, the seriousness of, like, wounded veterans and things like that. Also, I think, like, gang violence is something it's really trying to touch on and doesn't quite have the balls to, like, really go for it. And I get it. It's a PG, superhero movie primarily aimed at kids. But I think it could still have a little bit more satirical bite to it, especially for a character that... Jesus Christ, the way Shaq moves, he's walking like RoboCop, so at least give me some of that RoboCop satire. Like Annabeth Gish, I think she's like fine in this, if we're going to talk about some other performances. Yep. I mean, I will say I did like that the movie, we've talked about how there is some humor to moments like that. Like the moment, I had the same thought as like, is he going to throw her out the window? And then the other moment that kind of made me laugh, even though it probably shouldn't, is a moment where when he first brings her, back home to his, like, what is going to become his lair, his Uncle Joe's, junkyard where they build like their version of the Batcave, and they bring her there and they tell her, you're going to become our our tech person, because the character Sparky is clearly influenced by Oracle from the DC Comics. Barbara Gordon, who after she was shot by the Joker and paralyzed, she became Oracle and was just in a wheelchair, but she was like the tech, the eyes and ears with the multi screens for the Bat family, and that's what they're doing with Sparky here. But there's a moment where she's still kind of depressed about her lot in life. She's not happy about being in this wheelchair, and she falls out of the wheelchair, and like the uncle goes to help her, but Shaq stops him and is like, no, and he's like watching her from a distance as she struggles to get in the chair. And it's like, I get it. I get what the movie's saying. Like, right, he's saying this is like a lesson for her. She needs to finally, just learn that this is what her life is going to be like, and she has to get herself into the chair. But like every time they cut back to Shaq and he's like watching her struggle with this like smile on his face, it's like so funny to me because it's like so just filmed so inappropriately. But beyond that, I will say I did like that the movie never really treated her as a joke. The movie took her plight and like what that character is going through fairly seriously. So I did like that. Oh yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, you're talking about her kind of being Oracle and being kind of like the tech guru of the movie. And another 90s thing, the 90s had like exponential growth in technology, and all these blockbusters always want to tell you about it. They want to tell you about the newest, latest, and greatest LCD screen, or in this case, a 500 megahertz piece of technology, or the internet.
The TV station said the videotapes of the robbery were sent anonymously. Big time infomercial. High-tech weapons not available in any store. And if you act now...
How does a buyer make contact?
In this day and age, there's only one way.
The internet?
Damn right. We can pick up all kinds of good crap, not just porno.
That is always super fun for me to watch. Definitely. Simpler times.
I'm gonna mention another performance here to get to, because you were talking about unintentional humor and some of the things that make you laugh. So can we talk about like when a joke it gets taken the wrong way, when already bad jokes go wrong? That was another like unintentional laugh moment for me. So I'll start by saying I think honestly, to me, the best performance of this movie might be Uncle Joe, who's played by Richard Roundtree. That's right, Shaft himself is in this, and I think that's just because Richard Roundtree is just so naturally. Again, he has Shaquille O'Neal's charisma, but also acting ability. You know, like Richard Roundtree is just like one of those guys who he just exudes charisma on screen, and he's like really kind of fun in this, in like a not very substantial, smaller, just kind of there for comic relief role. But there's a moment where when they first introduce like the hammer, they're like talking about the hammer, and like unintentionally, I'm pretty sure unintentionally, everything they're saying about the hammer seemed like so phallic. And like my girlfriend and I start laughing at it, and then I get the joke, but it's not helped by the fact that they're already talking phallic. Uncle Joe sees it and he goes, "I really like the Shaft." And I was like, "Oh no!" Yes, we get it. He played Shaft, but what are you doing, movie? So that was another moment like that. But yeah, I thought Richard Roundtree was actually pretty good in this.
Yeah, it kind of feels like, I mean, I'm sure it was intended as like a passing of the torch from Shaft to Steel, but. Yeah, did not pan out that way. Yep. But I agree. He was he's a welcomed presence in a movie of shit, for sure.
Now, I want to talk about Judd Nelson, because we mentioned like the problems with Shaquille O'Neal in this. Like you talked about how, he's uncomfortable in the suit. Obviously, there's just the acting challenges. Couldn't find stuntmen. The action scenes are slow because of him. The other like weird thing is, if you have an actor as big as Shaq in the movie, you'd think you'd want the villain to be an imposing physical threat, right?
Yeah.
And instead, they cast a very tiny like white man to be the villain, who poses no threat whatsoever to Shaft to Steel. Very strange choice. Judd Nelson feels lost in this movie.
Yeah.
And what I wanted to say about Judd Nelson is, this is not hyperbole, I promise. This is 100% true. I think you and I, Chris, have talked about before about how it's kind of fun to go back and remember the movie you saw as a kid that made you realize that movies could be bad. Because we all have that period where, like, for years you just think, like, it's a movie, it's good, right? Like, everything you see. And then you start to go, like, oh, no, wait, movies can actually be bad. Judd Nelson, for me, was actually the actor who, as a kid, helped me realize that actors' careers can, like, fail and fall apart. Because when I was a kid, obviously, Breakfast Club was on all the time.
Yeah.
And he is, like, the most iconic character from Breakfast Club. And so in my mind, Judd Nelson was, like, a huge star as a kid. Because I'm like, well, geez, he's the guy in Breakfast Club. Everybody loves that movie. It's on TV, like, every day. And then, like, he did not follow up Breakfast Club amazingly, like he gets sounding almost fire. He's like a voice of Rodimus Prime and Transformers the movie, but like he starts doing stuff like From the Hip and Relentless, and I don't remember if these were like major hits, but I know like his star was falling, and I remember that even I as a kid was kind of like, why is he like such a big deal in Breakfast Club? And it seems like the Judd Nelson movies are becoming more few and far between, and nobody cares about them. So I honestly remember as a kid being like, oh, like you can like be big for a bit and then nobody gives a shit about you. And like, I think the only reason he's even in this movie as the main villain is because he started to have a little bit of like one of those like late, like, well, not even late career for him, mid-career, but like he got on the show Suddenly Susan.
Right.
That was like the year before this. And so he was starting to have like a little bit of a career renaissance. And that's what always happens, right? If someone suddenly is like a TV, breakout star, they'll put them into movies again. But yeah, like he never, like after Suddenly Susan was done, it was kind of like back to like, I don't want to call it obscurity, but it's just.
I mean, it kind of is.
It kind of is. Judd Nelson has certainly never had the career you would think he would have following Breakfast Club.
No.
And then you look at a movie like Steel and his performance, and you go like, oh yeah, okay. It's like, yeah, we're not missing much, I guess. I think there's just something about John Bender maybe that like he really connected to that character in like the right way. And I don't know that he obviously never found another character to lock into like that. Now, to be fair, is Nathaniel Burke on the page giving him anything to work with? Oh hell no.
No.
But a good actor or an actor who at least gets the spirit of like a comic book film would look at that character on the page and go, this sucks. I'm going to overact. I'm going to act crazy. I'm going to do something to make this interesting. He is so boring. So you have just like this boring, small white man who is no threat to Steel, and that's your main villain. So again, the movie's like, oh, this is not exciting at all.
Yeah, he's like a real wet blanket of a villain.
Yeah.
Like, at least, take some lessons from Mask and grab a toothpick. And have a thing, have a gimmick.
Because you watch him, he's like the movie starts and him, Annabeth Gish and Shaq are all like in an army unit together, and he's actually Nathaniel Burke is the one who like he takes the weapons that Shaq has designed. Shaq is trying to design weapons for non-lethal usage in war, and Burke doesn't like that. He wants to make the weapons even more powerful, more deadly. He kind of messes with them. He causes the accident that paralyzes Sparky.
Yeah.
But you'd think that like the through line would be that he's always been jealous of like John's like size and natural ability.
Totally.
And like you would think that we would build to him building like a mech suit, right? So he could have his own mech suit to fight Steel. No, it just builds to him standing on a stage holding like a gun to Sparky's head, and then like a confrontation where he just basically yells at Steel, shoots at him, and then, sorry, spoiler alert, giving away the end of the movie right now, but shoots at Steel, and like his energy weapon bounces off Steel's costume, suit, whatever you want to call it, bounces back, hits him, kills him. That's it.
What you're explaining is the 2008 movie Iron Man. Like this is the thing. Iron Man does everything you just said. It does Steel better. There is a lot of parallels to this movie.
Our hot take is that Iron Man is the better version of Steel.
Exactly. Put that on the poster, everyone. But yeah, it's those things can be done. That's why it was all there. But nobody seemed to, I guess, care enough. Like it's supposed to be the starring vehicle for Shaq, this larger-than-life personality, even at a young age. And you're right, Judd Nelson, why doesn't he just get big with it? Why doesn't he get outrageous with it? Why doesn't he get Gary Oldman about it, And I guess that's because Judd Nelson is not Gary Oldman, now that I say it out loud. But yeah, this is just kind of a wet blanket of a movie in general, Like, it is very just dull. Like, it's a dull movie. It feels direct to video. Like, it's no coincidence that a guy that built his career in TV makes a movie that feels made for TV. I don't know. Do you know any Steel apologists out there? Like, you're usually the voice of the apologists. Or at least you know of some. But yeah, like, have you ever met anybody saying, "Hey, Steel, I at least liked it as a kid"?
No, we talked about when we did our episode of like The Phantom, right? We were like, well, neither of us were that blown away by the movie, but we had seen in our research that there's a lot of people who are like, I grew up on The Phantom, I love The Phantom, And you come across that with like everything we kind of do, right? Like, last week, Supergirl, not a great movie, but I told you how I'm sure I'm not alone in this. Like, just having a crush on Helen Slater and growing up with that movie at the right time, I'm kind of nostalgic for it. But no, I've never really encountered like a cult following for Steel. I don't know if you did the same thing as I did. I tried to find Shaq talking about this movie today. He just doesn't seem like he does. People do not seem to want to like come back and talk about this movie that much. So yeah, I think this one really is kind of forgotten by time. And like, again, you were talking about like, it looking like it's made for TV or for video because of Kenneth Johnson. I think Kenneth Johnson, again, is the problem because, we just mentioned, why doesn't Burke wear like a mech suit or something? Is that because, again, Johnson's like, I'm not making a comic book movie. I'm not making a superhero movie. So he's like, you know what? My villains are going to be realistic. They're just, it's just weapons dealers. And it's like every time he should be taking this movie over the top and putting it into comic book territory, he seems hesitant to, and that's also hurting the movie, obviously. Because this movie, at the end of the day, this is Shaquille O'Neal in a giant steel suit. There's no reason to try and be grounded with this and not, lean into the absurdity and not make a more campy movie. But I don't think that's what Kenneth Johnson wanted to do. I think he left pretty much all of his actors out to dry, did none of them any favors, and just gave us one of the most bland, forgettable superhero movies I've seen. Like, I'm not going to remember this after this conversation,
Yeah, and like you said earlier, we've covered a lot of bad movies on this podcast, and we'll continue to, for your listening pleasure. But there's just like, there's like nothing really to talk about with this one. You know, like sometimes there's like this weird Marvel, or there's this weird story or this backstory thing. Like you said, you're looking to see if Shaq even talked about this film ever. Mm-hmm. And he didn't even do like promotion. Like usually I find like an interview on some talk show or some radio show or something that maybe I can pull a clip and throw it on into the podcast for everybody. But Shaq just seems to have, you know, like made this movie over those 5 weeks in between his basketball career and then moved on, you know, took the L and moved on. And in some ways, I kind of like that. You know, like in some ways he's just like, yeah, that sucked. Let's not do that again. So there's a big stink with this movie, but I think it's mostly a forgettable stink. You know, like, you know, it was so bad that people forgot that, you know, there was a black superhero until Black Panther. You know what I mean? Like, it's like one of those things that Steel is just not talked about.
And today, like, all the rage is like multiverses, right? And people are like, oh, it's like, or get Nicolas Cage to come in and play Superman, even though he didn't even make that movie. You know, let's get every like former actor back. No one was like, are they gonna have Shaq like cameo as Steel? Like, nobody's even asking for that. You know, if you're like, you said there's nothing to talk about. Like, yeah, you know, you mentioned Ray J. We could talk about how, you know, future rapper and human piece of shit Ray J. Is like you know, his young nephew in this. Marvin, is that Martin? That's his name, right? Martin. Yeah. So you have young Ray J before the sex tape, before the multiple you know, cases of abuse and everything. So have that. Kevin Griveau, the co-creator of Underworld and who played Ray's, otherwise known as the brother of the doctor who did my surgery when I had my car accident.
Yeah, go listen to our Underworld Success to Series episode if you haven't. Kevin Griveau created the Underworld universe, so go listen to that.
He's in this as one of Burke's sidekicks, and he gets a few lines, and it's just, I only bring that up because he's got that voice, man. Every time he talks, you're like, oh, yeah, that guy's voice is just something else. Like he's worth casting the movie just for that. But yeah, I don't know. I'm just struggling to think of like, to almost prove you wrong. Like, no, there's got to be something to talk about this movie, right? But actually, no, there's not.
Other than I made that joke about Mask with a toothpick, and we don't like to shit talk actors, but I had to text Trev, and this man is not very attractive who plays Big Willie Daniels. He is, well, I don't know where they found this guy, but
it's unfortunate. Yeah,
he should. Well,
I think it's like mostly the haircut and like this, you know. But yeah, I don't know.
He has the face for pirate radio.
What did you think of the moment? So now we're just like challenging ourselves. Like, let's think of something.
Hey, John Hawk shows up as a mugger, and he doesn't try to rape our main hero.
Yes. Did you have the same like moment I did where you're like, is that John Hawkes? Like,
yes.
I did. And then it's like very clear it's John Hawkes, and you're like, oh, okay, well, at least now there's an actor I like in here, kind of walking around for a couple of scenes. I also like Charles Napier, the famous character actor. He plays the Colonel in this. And speaking of him, what'd you think of the scene where he talks to Steele on the phone and Steele uses a voice changer to sound like Arnold Schwarzenegger?
and then also he calls him out for sounding like Arnold.
Yeah, he calls him Arnold. Yeah,
it's this whole thing. I will say this. I do like, again, me really grasping for straws here, but I liked how Burke, the villain, immediately knew that Steele is John. I like that because duh. You know, like again, they couldn't find a stunt guy. The only man in LA that's 7'1", that's definitely Steele. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
the movie doesn't even play that. Like his grandma Odessa, who of course we haven't even talked about the thrilling subplot about whether she's going to be able to make her souffle. But like when they show her listening to like the news, and the news is just like, yes, there's this new vigilante in town. Witnesses describe him as a 7'1" African American man. She's just like, oh, all right.
You know, and then they start to like describe his personality. Like he's mild mannered and he's so polite and he's so nice, and you know his name is Shaq. It's just so funny. Oh, another huge. Well, I don't want to say huge laugh, but an unfortunate laugh or an unfortunate needle drop. Is at the end of the movie, they go eat the souffle at Grandma's Grandma's Kitchen or whatever, right? Her new restaurant. And Sparky has rigged up her wheelchair that she gets to stand up, right? But she's not really standing. Like it's the chair that's doing it. And then a song starts to play for the credits, and the lyrics are "Stand up."
I know.
And I'm like, guys, don't put that over the cripple. Don't do
it's
that.
Like
That's
the
not
theme
good.
song of the movie too. It's like because the name of the song. Did you clock the name of that song, Chris?
No, I didn't.
It's "Steal Yourself."
Oh God. Oh, that's worse than the puns I make. Yeah, this is you nailed it by saying this is your classic bad movie. Just nothing. It's just such a nothing, right? It's a nothing.
I'll give Shaq one more compliment. I'm trying to struggle to think of things to say about it. We talked about how he's like very self-effacing, and like one of the things people like about him is he seems in on the joke about like what a big crazy personality is and like just what a huge physical presence he is. Now we all know he's a basketball legend, 4-time NBA champ, very physical player. Obviously his size allowed him to like dunk and just he was a powerhouse out there in the court. But even I, as someone who don't follow basketball, know that he had. Speaking of Superman, Shaq had kryptonite in the game of basketball, and that was that he could not make free throws. It was infamous for how bad his free throw average was, and the movie makes like an ongoing joke of that. And I like that even at this point in his career, he was willing to like make that into a joke in the movie about how he's just terrible at free throws. Now I think the movie takes it to like the ridiculous degree to where I was fine with it just being a joke, like occasionally where they show him try to throw something in a trash basket and miss or whatever. The fact that it actually builds up to a crucial moment where he has to make a free throw with a grenade, it could have lived without that, especially since that's like the world's longest grenade, by the way, from the moment the pin is pulled to when it finally goes off. But yeah.
Throw it!
I never make these.
Okay, bend your knees and follow through. Come on!
At least Shaq was willing to have some fun with his own persona.
Well, and that's why, again, we don't like to shit talk actors. And in this case, I genuinely do not want to shit talk him, even though he was bad. Shaq is he's a good guy. He always has been, right?
Yeah, it's weird because there is an anomaly to this film. Maybe the most interesting thing about this movie is that it's a bad movie with a bad performance that somehow makes you like the bad performer even more.
Yeah. I said in my notes, Shaq is trying his best. And he just has natural charisma. His natural aura does ooze off the screen.
It's not just charisma, it's also his like physical presence.
Oh,
Shaq's
yes.
just no one else on earth looks like Shaq. So he is actually quite like amazing to look at on screen as well.
Isn't it amazing, like we're saying how much fun he was having with his faults. Like even, to be printed on celluloid forever, you know what I mean? About his free throws. Now, again, we'll get to him, in a couple episodes, but The Rock, never.
Well, he has no faults, Chris.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Right. Donate to Maui. It's this guy. You're right. It's fascinating that this movie sucks, but you like Shaq, so it's what the movie is watchable. Like it's a watchable movie. It's not one of those disasters like when we watched Maximum Ride, that was not a movie.
No.
That was just like scenes stitched
this is
together.
A bad one.
Yes,
but it's a movie, and like you said, it's short. In a day and age too, where like. I'm not Mr. Anti-long movie, but the problem with every movie being long today is that the bad movies are long too. That's the problem. Here you have a bad movie that's only 90 or so minutes. So you watch and you're like, this is bad, but it's not taking up too much of my time,
I mean, there was obviously no hints at sequels for this one. No talk about it. No plans. Nothing at all after this abomination of a failure. But would you welcome this kind of street level superhero back? Like I mean, I guess they tried with something like Luke Cage with the Marvel TV show, and that show fucking crashed and burned too, right? So I don't know. What do you think is missing here? Is it just following the source material better?
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
that's what it is, right?
I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with the idea of doing a Steel movie. I think if you have a legit DC EU going, where you can do like a build out a larger Superman expanded universe, I would love to see them be able to do Steel without having to do Death of Superman to get to him, because obviously I feel, I mentioned this in the intro about how at this point Death of Superman is just so overdone. I don't really need it anymore, and I think you can just introduce Steel as the character he is in the comics. He is someone who he had on a construction site accident. He was saved by Superman. Superman told him, like, try to pass this on, right? I saved your life. Try to do something. Try to do the same for someone else. And Steel took that or John Henry Irons took that to heart and becomes a superhero. I think you could do that without the Death of Superman. And in fact, we actually do have a good version of Steel in media right now. I don't know if you saw this, but he is a character on Superman and Lois on the CW, right? Which is a great show. Like, I know it's a CW show, but it's got a higher budget because it was originally made for Max and then taken over to CW. It's despite what you might think would be the stink of the Arrowverse, it's really been able to forge its own path. And honestly, I can't remember if I ever told you this in the text thread we were in. I think I did post, because they did bring in Doomsday, and Superman had his fight with Doomsday, and I think I posted for you guys to look at because I was really impressed by the fight.
You did, yes.
But that season, after that third season, I'm actually ready to say that Christopher Reeve will always be my Superman, but this show has kind of become, to me, like the best overall like live action representation of the Superman character. But Steel's a character in that show. He's an important supporting character, and I really like that version of him.
Cool.
So yeah, I'd be down for like a good Steel movie. And you said, could it be like a grounded like inner city thing? Yeah, I think you just need to get a filmmaker who wants to make a Steel movie. That's the thing, is Kenneth Johnson doesn't sound like he wanted to. He took Quincy Jones wanted to, his partner David Salzman wanted to, and then they gave it to a filmmaker who said, yeah, I'll take the bones of what you want to do, but I don't like these dumb comic books. I'll do something else.
Isn't it amazing with somebody like Quincy Jones and the power he held, and in a weird way, like, didn't flex his producer muscles into this movie? Didn't it feel like he probably could have come into this? Or would you say Kenneth Johnson actually kind of equaled Quincy Jones on that level when it comes to TV?
I don't think
producer?
He would equal, but I mean, I do think what you do have to remember, that is the important thing we've only kind of slightly alluded to in this, is that if you want to give Kenneth Jones and even maybe Quincy Jones Kenneth Johnson and Quincy Jones any defense here for why they handled it the way they did. This was before Blade. This is before X-Men. This is before Spider-Man. Comic book movies were not the same at the time. This was a really rough time for comic book movies. Superman and Batman had both flamed out by this point, so maybe that was the hesitation to say, like, we can't really make a movie as, ridiculous as the comic books, because that's not what people are looking for. It would take, some time before Hollywood finally come to realize that, that if you just treat this stuff with respect and basically do it as it does on the page, and, take it seriously, people will like it. But here I bet they were just afraid to do that. So they're like, well, yes, the comic books are the source material, but we're making more of like a sci-fi action movie or something.
Totally. You're so right.
Now, I will say, Chris, I also want to quickly throw this out there for people who are like would watch this or listen to our episode and are interested in the character of Steel. Right now, DC Comics is publishing a 6-issue miniseries called Steelworks, starring John Henry Irons as Steel. And Chris, I bring this up very importantly because it is written by Michael Dorn. That's right, Worf from Star Trek: The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine is writing the current Steel comic book.
Why have you done this to me?
So if you thought there's not going to be a Star Trek connection to this, you're damn wrong.
Dude, you got X-Files and Star Trek into this one. This
I'm
is
pretty
it.
proud of myself. If only there was like a Mystery Science Theater connection in this, I'd be a happy man.
They never did this movie on one of those
three
episodes?
favorite shows. They should have,
yeah. Steel's bad. Don't watch it if you haven't. Go watch that Superman and Lois show. Like if that's the takeaway, try that show out. Trev loves it. So,
yep.
I think that'll do it for the Steel episode, though. Again, I'm sorry if we sort of floundered a little bit trying to get things to talk about, but you're with professionals who pay to do this ourselves. But next episode.
To be fair, we just talked about it more in like 90 minutes than Shaq has over the last 2 decades. So
that's true. Yeah. We're the Shaq of podcasts.
That's what I've always said.
Yeah. And listeners, going forward, we are sticking with the Superman universe of, the Superman aspect of the DC universe. Flash forwarding another decade to Superman Returns in 2006. The Kevin Spacey starring vehicle.
Yeah, directed by Bryan Singer. Not a problematic movie to talk about at all.
Yeah, so we're gonna have a lot.
Buckle up, folks. There's gonna be some landmines in this one.
Yes, we will have a lot to say about Superman Returns. I think. And then after we will be jumping to Green Lantern 2011, then Black Adam 2022, and then culminating the DCPU with the Flash of 2023. So follow along at F2F Pod. That's at F2, the number 2F Pod on all the socials. Like us there, like us everywhere. Rate, review, whatever you do. A star rating would be sweet. And just join the tribe and hit that subscribe. And, in the meantime, now that I'm finally done talking about this movie, I am just going to go back to work on that suit. I got nothing else to do tonight, so I'm just going to go back to pounding my steel.
You have a good time over there.
Okay, now that he's gone, I am immensely happier. Met that man a decade ago, almost. Trapped me in this godforsaken fucking schedule. Every 2 weeks. I don't even really like him, if I'm being honest. Man, that actor really did look like Mask, though. Mask with a toothpick. Annabeth Gish, X-Files. There's so many episodes. Like fucking 400. Trev always wants me to watch X-Files. He wants me to watch Star Trek. He's such a nerd. But I guess, I did watch Strange New Worlds. It is really good. I mean, it is good. I like that Anson Mount. He's got great hair. I got great hair. Better hair than Trev. It's all good, though,
Hey, Chris, I'm back, right?
Oh.
Now that everyone's gone, I can just, and you're not recording anymore, right? I can just tell you, now that I don't have to act cool for our listeners. Dude, I love Steel.
I know, it's pretty good, right?
Yeah, it was awesome.
The Michael Jordan of DC movies, for sure.
Oh, no question.
Speaking of, I can't believe we didn't mention Space Jam once.